A desperate man meets a mysterious woman online.
Hi, Mr. DJ.
But when another woman gets involved,
They said, it's bad between us. It's really, really bad.
Open this door!
a nightmare unfolds.
I'm real scared.
There's a lot of bleeding, strangulation marks.
Who will live? And who will die?
I tell you, evil.
Gotta go. Love you.
In the sleepy desert town of Kingman, Arizona on Route 66, a local DJ has a surprise in store for his listeners.
Yeah, ladies, I'm offering you a chance to see me. The one, the only Alan Lee Lama walk naked on Beale Street.
He generated attention. He was a consummate entertainer. He really liked the limelight and kept inventing ways to put himself there.
Hi, folks. Glad you could make it. Yeah, you heard me. Walk naked.
He started his walk. He was mic'd up,
Good to see y'all.
and he stopped in the middle of the street. And he said, "Ladies and gentlemen."
I'd like to introduce you to my dog, Naked.
See, I told you, I promised I'd be walking naked down Beale Street.
But there is another side to the controversial DJ.
Al was kind of a loner. He didn't socialize. He just stayed to himself, except for when he would be with the ladies.
So all you lovely ladies out there, if you want to wake up with a real man, you know what to do. Wake up with Alan Lee Lama.
It was kind of cute, sexual entendre, because he was single for most of the time that he was employed there. He kind of liked to present himself as a ladies' man.
Until he meets Amy, a loans officer based 1,200 miles away in San Antonio, Texas.
Yeah, ladies, I am engaged to be married to the most beautiful girl in the world.
It surprised me that he would leave a forum of entertainment that suited his personality and his career goals.
But remember, I'll always love you, Kingman.
But Alan loves Amy more. He leaves Kingman and his beloved job to be with her in Texas. But in San Antonio, Alan's radio career stalls. Unable to find any DJing work, he finds a new way to earn a buck. Massage at the local mall.
That for a person whose ego is inflated by attention and masses of eyes and ears riveted upon him, to only have one person or the back of their head staring back at him would be a come down.
Alan's drop in status takes a big toll, and his marriage to Amy quickly falls apart. Newly single in an unfamiliar town, he looks for love online. There's one girl calling herself Abby O who grabs his attention. Abby is perfect for Alan, but there's one downside. She lives 1,400 miles away in the desert of Southern California. Alan begs Abby to come visit him in Texas, but she won't fly all that way to meet a stranger. But 5 months into their flirty online romance, Alan's career luck changes. He gets an interview with a radio station in California. If Abby won't come to San Antonio, he'll go to Victorville.
It's usually just a place that people pass on their way to get to someplace more interesting. It's very small, so you feel kind of trapped.
Alan's interview is the next day, but tonight he's going to be seeing Abigail in the flesh for the first time.
Alan?
I was a little kid when I met Kathy. Through our church, we would do youth group things together, and she's fun and always wanted to have an adventure.
Al.
Right.
In the church, she'd smile and do a good job. But I don't know if people really know her intimately or not.
Alan, concerned for Abby, calls her when he's alone.
Hi, Mr. DJ.
Are you okay?
I'll live. It wasn't serious, but I do feel like really shaken. And my leg, oh my God, it's so painful.
I gotta see.
Not now, Al. Not while I'm in the hospital. I look bad, like really bad. You don't want to see me now, trust me.
Okay. Okay.
There's nothing left for Alan to do.
Sure.
But the trip isn't a total waste. Since meeting at the motel, Kathy and Alan strike up a surprising friendship. They talk and text regularly, usually about Abby.
Oh, I'm really gross.
Jim Quinn, Kathy's husband of 15 years, is a devoted family man.
I just adored him and talked about him to everyone who would listen. My big brother did this, and my brother Jim did this.
Maybe I should invest in some weights.
Maybe if you didn't spend so much time at church, we'd actually be able to work out together.
The church was a central part of our lives. We all met our spouses. Your best friends are all the people that you know at church. It's sort of like an extended family. Probably the single biggest aspect of our lives.
You just gonna stand there and watch me?
Kathy has always followed her faith, but recently, friends and family have noticed that her priorities are changing.
She started losing weight and changed her hair a little bit and was buying a lot of new clothes. And I think she just wanted to be a different person.
With his radio career going nowhere, Alan is back in Texas working as a masseur. But his mind is on other things.
Excuse me for a second, man.
While Alan grows closer to Abby, the same can't be said for Kathy and Jim. After a weekend away to see Jim's favorite football team, tensions between the couple are mounting.
Hey, Kathy, you got the room keys? Kathy? Hey, Kathy.
Everybody thinks he's so holy.
We don't drink or smoke, and she was doing both things and using bad words that we don't generally use.
Jim is starting to worry.
He's so God-fearing. They don't know what he's actually like. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm scared, Al. I'm real scared.
While former DJ Alan Lee Lama gets closer to online love Abigail,
I gotta see.
her best friend, Kathy Quinn, is struggling in her marriage to Jim.
No, not right now. I'm all gross. I'm scared, Al. I'm real scared.
No, I know. She's just not the same woman. Tammy, it's all the dieting and the smoking.
Jim's sister, Tammy, who lives 180 miles away in Las Vegas, is his closest friend and confidant.
Jim said, Tammy, it's bad between us. It's really, really bad. I was in complete shock because I thought everything was fine.
Tammy, I gotta go. I'll call you later.
I think Kathy was looking for someone that she could talk to, some kind of companion, someone that she could laugh with and maybe be a little racy with.
Jim's suspicions are confirmed. Kathy has been in constant contact with Alan.
So what? I've got no privacy now? Haven't you taken everything else?
I'm not taking anything, hon, but what is this?
I'm just talking to friends. I'll show you. Harmless. Al is just a friend, Jim.
I think he was absolutely shocked when he found out that she had been talking to someone online. It was just a complete shock.
What is happening to you, Kathy?
With no one to talk to in her small Christian community, Kathy confides everything in Alan.
What, has he hurt you again?
It's every day now. What he does to me in the bedroom.
What are you saying? Is he forcing you?
I'm his wife.
Well, married or not, there's a word for that. Rape.
I don't even want to think of that word.
You gotta get out. You gotta get away from that guy before something really bad happens.
Kathy has some of this Alan guy. She can tell everything, her deepest, darkest secrets too. He doesn't seem to judge her.
You gotta listen to me, Kathy. You hear?
Evidently, Alan really likes Abigail and just knows that Kathy is Abigail's friend.
After her car accident, Abby reassures Alan that she's healthy enough to work and resumes her singing career.
You wearing that dress?
That's only for special occasions. Seriously, though. I can't be around as much as I'd like to for Kathy. She's having like the worst time with Jim.
I know. I mean, the guy's scum. He's dangerous.
Gotta go. Love you.
In Victorville, life in the Quinn's house is reaching a breaking point.
Jim found a bill for their telephone usage, and it said that Kathy and this guy had talked or texted like 16,000 minutes.
Kathy?
It was like $1,000 bill.
I feel so trapped, Al. Like, I can't breathe.
Kathy? Kathy, who are you talking to? Is it him? Is it Al?
See what I mean?
Kathy, what's he doing?
I can't even go to the bathroom without him following me.
Open this door, Kathy, now! Kathy! Kathy!
Just leave me alone!
Kathy, please!
Tell him!
I want a divorce!
With our church background, that's almost the worst thing you can do is get divorced, because that's against God.
Kathy, what's going on?
Kathy knows that Jim will do anything to avoid breaking up their family.
He lost a lot of weight. He was very depressed. His mind was racing all the time. That made me upset with her, to see my brother be treated like that by someone.
After threatening divorce, Kathy thinks ahead. If the worst happens, she'll need a refuge. She starts to look at apartment rentals.
I'll take it.
Massage, ma'am? $8. Come on. I'll do it for $5.
Alan is planning to change his life as well. There's certainly nothing keeping him in Texas anymore.
Good news or bad news?
I'll take the good. I need it.
So I got a gig.
That's great! And the bad?
It's Carolina over Christmas. I won't do it if you don't want me to.
Do it. You gotta do it.
It's a bitter disappointment.
Okay. Soon. Bye.
The one thing Alan looked forward to was spending Christmas with Abby. At last, Alan makes his move. In spite of Abby's tour, he moves closer to Victorville, where he anxiously awaits her return.
So, what do you think?
It's, yeah, I don't know. It's fine.
Oak countertops, new fridge, beautiful.
Since renting the apartment, Kathy has decided not to move in.
And guess what? It's yours. I'm gonna decide about the divorce after Christmas. You can use this place for now, anyway. And you can pay me rent when you get a job.
And he's cool with that?
Things have changed with Jim.
Jim has been fighting hard to keep Kathy. It's given her second thoughts about the divorce.
I was in church yesterday, and I can't do this. I can't lose my family. I can't lose you.
She had said in the very beginning, I won't say I love you again until I really mean it.
I love you, Jim Quinn.
His hope that he had wanted all along was coming true. Oh, she loves him and she's gonna stay together.
What about the divorce?
What divorce?
By the new year, their marriage and Kathy are transformed.
Ta-da!
Wow. Doesn't Mommy look great? Oh my gosh, you look beautiful. Look amazing. Are you ready to go?
Mm-hmm.
Great, okay. Okay, we'll see you guys later, okay? Bye-bye. Okay, bye.
Kathy plans an intimate dinner to celebrate their revived marriage. It will be a night that no one will forget.
Somebody, please help! Please help!
To rekindle the flame in their marriage, Kathy and Jim Quinn go out for an intimate dinner. But their evening turns into a nightmare.
Somebody, please help! I think my husband's been murdered. Please help!
Kathy calls 911. Paramedics and police rush to the scene. Kathy can only watch as the nightmare unfolds. But her worst fears are confirmed. Jim, her husband of 15 years, is dead. Detective Gina Perez of the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department finds Kathy in a state of shock.
Mrs. Quinn? Detective Perez. Are you able to tell me what happened here tonight?
We were just coming back from the mall. We'd gone to dinner. And we stopped so that I could use the restroom. And I got back to the van. That's when I found him.
Sergeant Bobby Dean is immediately struck by the state of Jim's body.
You really want to wait until an autopsy to determine what the exact cause of death was, but we could tell he'd been stabbed. There was a lot of bleeding. He had strangulation marks around his neck.
Do you know anybody that would want to do this to your husband? No enemies? Nobody that he was in conflict with? No debts? Sorry, I had to ask.
Kathy agrees to go back with Perez to the station to help unravel the events of the night.
After we talked to her, we told her that we needed to drive down to the station. She's not a suspect. She's just someone who's, from what we can see, is a terrible victim of circumstances.
But Perez does notice something unusual about where the Quinn's van is parked.
If someone needs to use the restroom, you're going to find the closest parking stall. But it was unusual because this vehicle was parked so far away from the entrance of the doorway. So that was a little unusual.
As investigators process the scene, Jim's next of kin are informed.
I immediately started shaking. I sat on the couch and just tried to process it, but it's almost, there's nothing to compare it to, so you don't know how to feel. You don't know what to do. I didn't cry for a long time because I was just shaking. I think my body was just in shock.
At the sheriff's office, Detective Perez continues to press Kathy about her marriage to Jim.
Kathy, were there any problems between you and your husband?
She said they had just normal, ordinary problems, just like every couple does, but nothing out of the ordinary.
Did you often drive that far for dinner on Friday nights?
Oh, well, the truth is, me and Jim, this was supposed to be like a date night. We'd been just going through a really rough patch, but I mean, we were over it, totally.
As far as she had said, there was no problem. They just had a great night. She said it felt like they were kids again, and it was a wonderful night.
Now, this is just a routine thing at this station. Would you be happy to take a polygraph test?
Is that like a lie detector?
Ma'am, it just helps us prove that a person is telling the truth.
Sure. I've got nothing to hide.
We explained it was because she was the last one to be seen with him. And she did tell us that she had nothing to do with the murder of her husband.
At the crime scene, forensic officers examine the blood spatter evidence.
It was pretty bad. There was a lot of blood spatter inside the van, on the console, on the dashboard, the front windshield, the seat where he was sitting. But in contrast, there was minimal blood on the driver's seat. That indicated to us that that seat was occupied at the time the murder was committed. And somebody was sitting there.
But that doesn't fit with Kathy's account. At the time of the murder, she said, she was in the restroom of the burger restaurant.
Forensic evidence that we have from the van tells us that somebody was in the driver's seat when your husband was attacked. Do you know who that might have been?
No. No, ma'am.
Were you next to Mr. Quinn when he was murdered?
I wasn't. I swear to God, I wasn't.
Just give me a moment, please.
Monitoring the interview in the adjoining room, Detective Perez waits for the results of the polygraph test.
She's lying.
Then we asked the polygrapher if she would go back in and, again, just start asking more questions of Kathy. And she did, and she told her, "You're being dishonest and untruthful, and so we need the truth." And then the different stories started coming out.
So yeah, I was in the van.
That was a lot of fun, thank you.
Yeah, it was.
That was such a nice bottle of wine.
And there was someone else.
He was a complete stranger?
Yes, ma'am. I met him online in one of those chat rooms. But he tracked me down and he showed up outside the mall last night.
Are you sure you're okay to drive? I don't mind.
Oh, honey, I'm fine.
What the hell?
She said the stranger gets into the vehicle and starts struggling with Jim in the passenger side.
Kathy, just listen to him. Just drive.
I was so scared, so terrified that he was gonna hurt Jim, so I just drove.
I'm sorry.
From the shopping center all the way up to the fast food restaurant. It's probably 25 minutes. She's saying that they're struggling the entire way.
Kathy claims that the stranger allows her to stop at a fast food restaurant so she can use the restroom. While she's in there, Jim is murdered.
Why would a stranger with a knife stop to let you use the restroom?
He knew that I wouldn't say anything.
If that were the case and it was a stranger, why would you not have called 911 or asked for help when you went inside the restaurant?
He had a knife to Jim's throat.
When the polygraph test indicates that Kathy still isn't telling the truth, she is arrested and detained at the station.
My husband and I kind of looked at each other and thought, oh, wow, she's still being talked to by the police. Could there be anything? But you don't want to believe it or can't believe that this could be connected.
It's time for Detective Perez to confront Kathy.
You're lying again, Kathy.
Under pressure, Kathy changes her story yet again.
It was Alan.
Speak up.
Alan Lee Lama.
When Kathy Quinn befriends former DJ Alan Lee Lama online,
Al is just a friend.
she shares intimate details about her husband, Jim Quinn.
What he does to me in the bedroom.
There's a word for that. Rape.
After Jim is brutally murdered, Kathy accuses her new friend of the crime.
Alan Lee Lama. He murdered Jim.
It was a possibility that Al Lama was just another made-up name, another story she was going to give. So we look at for corroborative information. Well, what do we have? What can you tell us about Alan? Well, I rent an apartment for him. Oh yeah, what's the address?
Kathy discloses the address of her rental apartment in Apple Valley.
We eventually got a search warrant for Mr. Lama's home. We identified ourselves, gave him a copy of the search warrant, told him what we were looking for.
But officers find nothing incriminating inside the apartment, and the fast-talking DJ is unusually quiet.
Mr. Lama, this is a murder case here. This is very serious. It doesn't come more serious.
Mr. Lama didn't say a word. Confronted with murder, you would think someone would say, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. But he didn't say a word. Not one word.
Outside the apartment, officers search Alan's pickup truck.
Inside the back seat was a drawstring for a sweatshirt, like a hooded sweatshirt, and the drawstring had blood all over it.
We'll be getting that cord tested, Mr. Lama. If that's Mr. Quinn's blood, then be prepared to do some talking.
At the sheriff's headquarters in San Bernardino, Kathy stands by her story that Alan Lee Lama is her husband's sole killer.
I was having problems with my marriage. I didn't want to with Jim. And Al just kept telling me that he was a rapist and that we had to do something, you know, teach him a lesson for hurting me.
Kathy admits she agreed to Alan teaching Jim a lesson, but she denies that she knew anything about a plan for murder.
And I swear to God, I just thought that Al was gonna rough Jim up a little bit.
That was a lot of fun.
That's what he said he was gonna do. He was just gonna rough him up a little bit.
Are you sure you're okay to drive?
But he got into the van. I just went crazy. And I just kept shouting, stop, stop. But he just kept carrying on and on and on and on and on.
Now under arrest, it's time for Alan to account for his movements.
Why did you come to California, Mr. Lama? Was it to murder Mr. Quinn?
If I'd murdered Mr. Quinn, why would I hang around in California waiting to be picked up by you? She's lying. I told you I was sick in bed.
But you didn't have a job or anywhere to live when you first came here, did you? So why'd you show up here?
I came to meet Abby, my girlfriend.
Alan had come to California 2 months earlier to be with Abby, the woman he'd met online.
Your girlfriend?
My girlfriend.
Right. You don't know, do you? You really don't know.
I am Abigail.
Her statements now come out in reference to meeting Mr. Lama on the internet, but under the guise of using a second persona. And the persona that she developed was someone by the name of Abby O.
Abby. Abigail. Abby, or whatever you call her, your so-called girlfriend. It's Kathy Quinn. One and the same.
But I talked to both of them.
Together? In the same room?
Alan?
What's Abby really like?
She's beautiful, talented, real party girl.
Are you okay? How bad? I gotta see you.
Oh, well, I'm in the hospital.
You know I'll make it worth your while.
Oh, thank you, Mr. DJ. Gotta go. Love you.
Abby was all in your head, Al. Your fantasy woman. And Kathy's.
She's trying to frame me. She's evil. I tell you, evil.
Under the fake online identity of Abby O, Kathy Quinn has lured DJ Alan Lee Lama to California.
Love you.
When she accuses him of murdering her husband,
Alan Lee Lama.
Alan points the finger at her.
She's trying to frame me. She's evil. I tell you, evil.
With Alan still protesting his innocence, investigators examine surveillance footage from the Ontario Mall where Kathy and Jim had dinner the night of the murder. A hooded man who parks his vehicle next to the Quinns is seen following them into the mall.
Stature and the body build of the man who was driving the van and the sweatshirt were all consistent with Lama's person, his truck, and the sweatshirt that was found that night.
Despite this evidence, Alan still doesn't change his story.
I did not murder James Quinn. I did not. She's trying to frame me, okay? I'm innocent. I'm innocent!
Investigators need conclusive evidence to tie both Alan and Kathy to the murder. Their computers and cell phones are searched.
Following the murder, Lama sent text messages to Kathy telling her to get rid of the evidence and make sure there was nothing incriminating left in the van.
Facing this undeniable proof that she did conspire with Alan, Kathy at last confesses to her part in her husband's murder and gives her final version of events. On their way home from Ontario Mills Mall, Kathy pulls off the highway into a dead end.
I don't know where we are. I made a wrong turn or missed the off-ramp or I don't know.
That's fine. You know what? We'll just go up ahead and make a U-turn.
But the turn was planned with Alan, and he's laying in wait nearby.
What the heck?
During Alan's frenzied attack on Jim, the knife breaks.
What would drive someone to do that? To murder someone and sit and listen to that? What would make her so hard-hearted?
After the attack, Alan returns to Apple Valley, and Kathy drives herself and Jim's body to the burger restaurant.
To think that a simple solution like divorce turned to murder, what goes through someone's head to make that decision?
Kathy negotiates a deal. Pleading guilty to second-degree murder, she gets 15 years with a chance of parole. With no evidence of any domestic abuse in her marriage, her motive wasn't revenge.
And I think she saw the murder as a way to get some life insurance money. But I think even more than that, she was so done being the person that was married to Jim and didn't want to have to deal with him anymore.
Tests on the cord found in Alan's truck find traces of his and Jim Quinn's DNA. In July 2004, Alan Lee Lama is found guilty of murder and conspiracy to murder. He gets life with no parole.
I absolutely believe that Kathy was the master manipulator, and that for a while Alan was a victim.
Rain fell in slow, fat drops the night the world first began to see a crack in the perfect facade. The street lamps cast halos on slick pavement, each pool of light flickering like a heartbeat, and the roar of a distant thunderstorm seemed to echo something deeper, something unnameable in the air above that quiet suburban Ontario neighborhood. If you had been standing there, in that moment, you might have thought nothing more than a storm rolling in ordinary, unremarkable, a natural prelude to sleep. But that night, the calm was a lie. The beauty of the rain, the gentle hush it brought to the world, all of it masked something raw, something that had been pulsing quietly beneath the surface of everyday life. The world was about to learn the name Paul Bernardo. The world was about to learn the name Karla Homolka. And for those who knew them, those names would sear into memory, haunting every quiet moment, every echo of laughter that once filled school halls and family dinners. Because sometimes true horror doesn't arrive with a scream, it arrives in the spaces between the raindrops, in the moments when everything seems just a little too normal. Paul Bernardo was, on the outside, the kind of man you'd hardly think twice about. A young man from Ontario, born and raised with the gentle cadence of Midwestern politeness. To the casual observer, he was quiet, polite, unassuming, the sort of face that might fade into a crowd on any street in Toronto. But behind those eyes, there was a tension, a controlled volatility that revealed itself only in the smallest gestures, the tight clench of his jaw when he spoke, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his gaze when something didn't go his way. He carried himself with a kind of measured precision that suggested both discipline and a deeper, darker hunger for control. And then there was Karla Homolka, at first glance a smiling, blonde-haired young woman with a warmth in her eyes that made people comfortable. She laughed easily, spoke with a lightness that drew people in, and seemed at ease in her suburban world of school dances and family dinners. To her friends and neighbors, she was friendly, even radiant, the sort of person you'd trust your secrets with, the sort of person whose presence made the ordinary feel brighter. But appearances, as we all know, are fragile things. They can hide shadows. They can hide truth. The rain that night was rhythmic, hypnotic. It tapped against windows like a persistent visitor insisting on attention. Inside the Homolka house, the scent of boiled potatoes and roast meat lingered in the kitchen like the comfort of ritual and family. The clock ticked in steady beats, and somewhere on the radio a late-night talk show host droned about politics and weather. Life, in that moment, was ordinary. Too ordinary. Too safe. But outside, where the rain washed the streets and mirrored the glow of streetlights, something had already begun to ripple, a subtle disturbance that would soon grow into a tidal wave of shock, fear, and disbelief. Because by the time anyone noticed anything was wrong, the first stone of a nightmare had already been set in motion. When people spoke later about that night, they would remember the rain. They would remember how it seemed almost symbolic, as though nature itself was mourning in advance, as though the sky knew what was coming even if the world did not. Some would recall the way the wind rattled in the eaves of their houses, how the air felt heavy with electric promise. Others would remember the eerie quiet that followed the rain, a silence so deep it seemed to swallow voices whole. But in that quiet, in the stillness of every suburban home tucked away from the glow of city lights, there were stories unfolding that no one would ever have predicted. In a home not far from that quiet street, a younger girl watched the rain trace cloudy patterns down the windowpane. She thought of nothing more than the promise of a clear morning, of school the next day, of homework and friends and the small, predictable rhythms of teenage life. Her room was scattered with posters of pop stars, textbooks stacked in unruly piles, and clothes strewn across a chair in the way all teenagers understand. She did not know that her life was on a collision course with something dark, something that would rip apart every safe assumption she had ever held. She could not have known that the world she thought she understood was about to shift in ways no one should ever have to comprehend. Not far from her window, in the dim glow of a living room light, two figures sat talking quietly. They spoke of trivial things at first, a movie they wanted to see, plans for the weekend, the song stuck in their heads. But beneath the easy banter was a current of tension, an underlayer of something unspoken but palpably present. Their eyes met often, not with warmth, but with calculation, not with affection, but with a mutual understanding that transcended ordinary expression. It was a dangerous dance, played out in looks and half-smiles, a choreography of control and compliance that only the two of them fully understood. For those two, the night offered something else entirely, not the promise of sleep, not the humble beauty of rain, but the quiet anticipation of something darker. In their minds, this night was not about storms or family dinners or ordinary life. It was about control. It was about power. It was about the thrill of stepping into a territory no one else would dare to tread. In the coming days and weeks, the ordinary facade would crack. Small things, a missing girl here, an unexplained silence there, would start to nag at the edges of awareness. Friends would notice empty seats at lunchtime, parents would feel the niggling tension of unanswered phone calls. And the rain-washed streets would witness the unraveling of something horrific, something that would ripple through neighborhoods, newsrooms, courtrooms, and dinner tables across the nation. But in that first night's rain, the danger was invisible. It was woven into the quiet, into the shadows of polite conversation, into the smiles that hid unspoken agreements. It moved like a ghost between the trees, silent but present, unseen but undeniably real. The storm had come, but no one knew yet that it was not weather that threatened them. The first thread of horror that would soon weave itself into the fabric of everyday Canadian life began not with a shout, but with a whisper. It began with rain. It began with ordinary moments unaware of their own fragility. And it began with two people whose outward normalcy masked the darkest of intentions. That stormy night in Ontario was the prologue, the subtle opening act to a saga that would expose the vulnerability of youth, the limits of trust, and the terrifying ease with which shadows can slip into sunlit places. The rain fell, soft and steady, as though washing away yesterday's dust, unaware that it was cleansing nothing at all. Inside homes, lights glowed warmly, families moved in familiar routines, and dreams drifted peacefully toward sleep. Outside, the storm played its quiet symphony, an unwitting soundtrack to the first moments of something monstrous. In just a few short hours, the world as they knew it would begin to change. A name would soon be whispered not in everyday chatter, but in fear, Paul Bernardo. And alongside it, another name, Karla Homolka, would come to embody the terrifying truth that evil often wears a friendly face. But here, in the calm before discovery, in the soft patter of that rain, no one had yet begun to understand that the real storm was just beginning. If you had been there that night, watching the streetlights reflect on rain-soaked concrete, you might have noticed a flicker of lightning on the horizon, heard a distant rumble of thunder, felt the first breath of wind slip through the trees. You might have shivered, closed your curtains, drawn a breath, and then gone to bed, assuming the weather would pass by morning. But the storm that was coming was not weather, it was human. And it would leave scars far deeper and more lasting than any fleeting thunderclap. So let us begin here, in that rain-drenched moment where the ordinary shook hands with the unthinkable, where a world unaware stood on the brink of waking to a truth no one ever wanted to face. Let us step through the curtain of calm into the heart of a story that would mark a generation. Let us begin with the rain. The streets of Ontario in the early 1990s seemed to breathe with an almost innocent rhythm, a cadence that belied the darkness lurking behind closed doors. Neighborhoods were neat, manicured, and orderly, houses with white picket fences and green lawns dotted the suburban sprawl, and the familiar hum of daily life created an illusion of safety. Children played in backyards under the watchful eyes of parents who believed that their world was predictable, manageable, and free of the kind of horror that only exists in the abstract, in stories read in newspapers or seen on television. Life moved in patterns, school buses arriving on time, grocery stores buzzing with conversation, neighbors chatting across fences about recipes and weekend plans, patterns that left little room for suspicion or fear. Paul Bernardo moved within this world with a quiet efficiency that allowed him to remain unnoticed, to blend in seamlessly. His exterior was composed, almost gentlemanly in appearance, carrying himself with a precision that masked the storm beneath. There was a certain deliberation in the way he spoke, a careful pacing in his movements that hinted at his desire for control. Every gesture seemed measured, each expression calculated to convey normalcy while hiding his darker compulsions. To anyone observing him casually, he was nothing remarkable, just another face in the suburban tapestry. But beneath the surface, an internal mechanism of obsession and compulsion was at work, waiting, calculating, and seeking an outlet. His life was structured, his routines rigid, but it was precisely within this structure that he found the means to orchestrate his hidden intentions. Carla Homolka existed in a world that appeared far removed from menace. Her blonde hair, bright smile, and affable manner made her appear approachable, trustworthy, even endearing. Friends and family described her as light-hearted and kind, a girl who laughed easily and could draw people into her orbit with warmth. She was the embodiment of normalcy, someone whose presence could soften the edges of any room, make tensions seem lighter, and whose very demeanor suggested innocence. Yet this innocence, as events would later reveal, was a carefully maintained mask that allowed her to navigate two realities simultaneously. On the surface, she was the daughter, the sister, the girlfriend, ordinary, relatable, and safe. Behind that mask, however, she was a participant, a co-conspirator, moving in tandem with Bernardo's meticulous plans, her actions serving to facilitate what no one in their community could even imagine. The physical settings of Toronto and its suburbs provided the perfect stage for their dual lives. Tree-lined streets, quiet cul-de-sacs, and modest homes allowed the couple to operate within the semblance of everyday life without attracting attention. Families left windows unlocked, children roamed neighborhoods freely, and neighbors nodded to one another with casual trust. The seemingly mundane details of suburbia, streetlights flickering at dusk, the aroma of fresh baking drifting from kitchen windows, the distant laughter of children playing soccer all contributed to a sense of security that masked the underlying vulnerability of those same spaces. In such an environment, the ordinary rhythms of life acted almost as camouflage, a natural barrier that obscured the violent choreography that Bernardo and Homolka were orchestrating behind closed doors. The duo's private world contrasted starkly with the neighborhood's normalcy. Inside homes, behind drawn curtains, and away from the eyes of passers-by, a meticulously controlled environment existed where fear was manufactured, where power was exercised, and where terror was enacted with methodical precision. Bernardo's desire for control manifested in rituals, plans, and calculated manipulations. He observed, tested, and directed, each movement purposeful. Carla's role was equally deliberate. Her apparent normalcy provided the veneer of innocence, her compliance with Bernardo's schemes enabling the mechanics of their crimes to unfold without interruption. In many ways, their interactions resembled a private performance, one where roles were rehearsed and lines were memorized, yet the consequences were irrevocably real and horrifying. Even the timing of their crimes demonstrated an acute awareness of the external world. They chose moments when houses would be empty, when parents were at work, or when social routines provided natural cover. Days blended into nights, and the boundaries between ordinary life and their clandestine operations became increasingly blurred. The world outside remained oblivious, carrying on with school schedules, shopping errands, and weekend gatherings, while inside, a parallel narrative unfolded, one that involved coercion, manipulation, and violence, all executed with an almost clinical detachment. The victims were never random, they were chosen with care, based on vulnerability, accessibility, and proximity. This selection process reflected both planning and a perverse understanding of human behavior, the way certain routines and patterns could be anticipated and exploited. The suburbs' predictable rhythms, which seemed so reassuring to the general population, were exploited by Bernardo and Homolka to create opportunities for abduction and confinement. Every path walked alone, every friendship that led a teenager out of sight, every moment of parental trust became a potential opening for their dark intentions. The community's normal rhythms became unwitting accomplices to their crimes. As the seasons shifted from the cold bite of winter to the hopeful warmth of spring, the duo's activities did not wane. The suburban landscape provided cover for experimentation, for testing the boundaries of risk, and for refining their methods. Public parks, quiet streets, and private homes became spaces where they honed the orchestration of fear. At the same time, their social lives were maintained as meticulously as their criminal ones. Family dinners, friendly gatherings, and school events continued without disruption, providing a continuous illusion of normalcy that was essential to maintaining their freedom. It was a delicate balance, one between visibility and concealment, between ordinary existence and extraordinary cruelty, and they navigated it with an unnerving ease. Within the homes of the Homolka family, normal life seemed unbroken. Parents moved through routines, unaware of the undercurrents shaping the lives around them. Bedrooms remained familiar havens, kitchens smelled of familiar meals, and the laughter of children and teenagers provided a soundtrack of everyday life. Yet within these walls, the ordinary and the horrific existed side by side, layered in ways that would later shock investigators, neighbors, and the nation. The duality of this environment, the safe exterior and the dangerous interior, illustrated how appearances could be manipulated and how evil could hide behind the most conventional facades. The community of Ontario itself, with its schools, churches, and recreational centers, played an inadvertent role in the setting. These spaces, designed to nurture and protect, became part of a broader landscape in which trust was exploited. Teachers believed in the responsibility of parents, parents believed in the vigilance of schools, and teenagers believed in the normalcy of everyday life. Each assumption, each layer of trust, contributed to the environment that allowed Bernardo and Homolka to operate undetected for as long as they did. By the time any suspicion began to take root, the duo had already established a rhythm, a pattern of secrecy interwoven with ordinary life that made detection extraordinarily difficult. The contrast between the suburban idyll and the hidden violence became a defining feature of their crimes, emphasizing how evil can adapt, camouflage, and flourish in spaces presumed safe. Their ability to exploit the mundane highlights not only the meticulousness of their planning but also the vulnerability inherent in everyday life, a vulnerability that is often overlooked precisely because life moves with such predictable rhythms. The stage for horror was set long before the first act unfolded. Streets, homes, schools, and family routines, all part of an ordinary world, were transformed into a canvas upon which Bernardo and Homolka painted a chilling narrative. The suburban calm, the predictable schedules, the sense of security in familiar spaces, all combined to create a backdrop that magnified the shock of the crimes when they were eventually revealed. In this environment, the contrast between appearance and reality was stark, a tension that would define the story for years to come. And so, as the 1990s rolled in with their quiet promises of continuity, growth, and everyday joy, the landscape of Toronto and its suburbs bore witness to something sinister quietly embedding itself into the rhythm of life. Streets glowed under streetlights, lawns remained mowed, families gathered for meals, and teenagers went about their routines, completely unaware of the lurking danger. Every detail of the setting, from the familiar to the mundane, would later serve as a chilling reminder of how horror can nestle into the folds of ordinary existence, waiting patiently for the right moment to emerge. The stage was perfectly crafted, the players perfectly disguised, and the world continued, oblivious, to the slow weaving of a nightmare. By understanding this setting, the homes, the neighborhoods, the subtle interplay of trust and routine, we begin to see how two individuals could manipulate an entire community's perception of normalcy. The story of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka did not begin with a scream, but with the delicate architecture of everyday life, with predictable rhythms, with the trust and innocence that defined an Ontario suburb in the early 1990s. In the juxtaposition of ordinary life and hidden menace, the foundation was laid for a tragedy that would leave an indelible mark on the psyche of a nation, illustrating how terror can rise not from chaos, but from the quiet certainty of routine and familiarity. The stage was set. The neighborhood streets glistened in sunlight after rain, the front doors remained locked only when convenient, the smell of home-cooked meals lingered in kitchens, and the laughter of youth filled the air. All of it, unknowingly, existed within the shadow of a carefully orchestrated threat. Every corner, every familiar face, every routine was a piece of a puzzle that, when revealed, would illustrate a world in which appearances were deadly deceiving, and where the setting itself had enabled the unimaginable. This was Ontario in the early 1990s, a world of suburban calm concealing hidden danger, a place where normalcy and horror collided in ways no one could have imagined, and where the stage was fully prepared for the events that would unfold over the next several years. The quiet, the routines, the innocent rhythms, they were all part of the story, and they all would become an essential backdrop to understanding the chilling reality of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. Tammy Homolka was the embodiment of youth in its most ordinary and fragile form, a girl whose life radiated the quiet vibrancy of adolescence, unremarkable in its innocence yet remarkable in its untarnished simplicity. She moved through her days with the tentative grace of someone who had not yet learned the burdens of suspicion or fear, her world measured in school assignments, weekend outings, and the comfortable cadence of family routines. She had the soft, unassuming presence that made her easy to overlook in a crowd, but those who knew her spoke of a warm smile, a playful laugh, and eyes that seemed to hold both curiosity and an innate gentleness. Tammy's room reflected her character, modestly decorated, with posters of popular culture icons tacked carefully on the walls, school books stacked with casual neatness, and personal mementos of a life still being written. She was 14, a cusp of discovery and vulnerability, carrying the hopes and expectations of a family who loved her deeply, a sister cherished and trusted, whose presence was woven seamlessly into the fabric of her home and community. Her family saw her as the glue that held certain moments together. Even in ordinary activities, Tammy contributed an effortless brightness to daily life. Breakfasts in the kitchen, with her parents bustling about preparing for the day, carried a lightness because of her laughter. Walks to school and casual conversations about homework or friends were filled with an energy that made the routines of suburban life feel fuller, more vibrant, more alive. She had friendships that were typical for her age, bonds that involved secrets whispered in hallways, laughter exchanged over shared jokes, and dreams spoken aloud without fear. In every way, Tammy existed as a mirror of normal adolescence, the quiet anchor of a family unit and the unsuspecting subject of a darkness that would soon encroach upon her life with an intensity no 14-year-old could comprehend. In the background of her existence, the world continued with its everyday rhythms, but there were subtle threads of tension invisible to Tammy, threads woven into the lives of those around her in ways that would eventually converge on her life. Paul Bernardo, outwardly unremarkable, had been assessing, waiting, understanding the contours of vulnerability and trust. Karla Homolka, her own sister, carried within her the ability to manipulate familial trust and routine, an unspoken complicity that blurred the lines between sisterly affection and calculated obedience. In the complex web of adolescent routines, social expectations, and familial structures, Tammy remained unaware of the danger lying close, hidden beneath the ordinary gestures of life. Every detail of her daily existence reflected innocence: the careful way she packed her school bag, the order in which she completed her assignments, the attention she paid to small social niceties, the casual generosity she offered to friends in need. She did not question the motives of those around her, she trusted implicitly, assuming the good intentions of people she knew, assuming that home was safe, that family was unassailable, that the rhythms of daily life were protective rather than perilous. It was precisely this trust that made her presence so vulnerable in the context of the impending horrors orchestrated by the two people she believed she could rely on. Tammy's interactions with Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka were tinged with ordinary familiarity, a casualness that concealed the manipulation underlying her sister's involvement and Bernardo's predatory focus. In the eyes of an outside observer, the visits, conversations, and exchanges would have seemed innocuous: a boyfriend visiting, a sister helping with homework, laughter and chatter in a kitchen or living room. Yet within these moments lay the subtle, unseen forces that would guide Tammy from the comfort of her daily routine into the unthinkable. Each gesture, each smile, each seemingly benign invitation to spend time with her sister and her sister's companion contained the potential for coercion and control. Even her thoughts, those private musings of adolescence, were untouched by the awareness of threat. She considered what outfit to wear, what song to listen to, which friend to meet at school, what conversation she might have with her parents about plans for the weekend. Her imagination extended only to the ordinary: sleepovers, weekend excursions, small rebellions of teenage independence. She had no framework to anticipate malevolence hidden behind familiar faces. The room she returned to at night, her bed carefully made, her possessions neatly in place, provided comfort, a tangible sense of safety that would prove tragically temporary. Tammy's presence was a quiet anchor within the Homolka household. Her parents relied upon her for the warmth she brought to daily life, and her sister's apparent friendship and care reinforced the sense of a protected domestic sphere. She engaged with her world through small, instinctive acts of kindness, offering to help set the table, sharing laughter over mundane observations, listening to family concerns with empathy beyond her years. Every interaction reinforced the impression of a secure, nurturing environment, a web of ordinary routines that, unbeknownst to Tammy, was about to be manipulated into a stage for tragedy. In school, she navigated hallways with the lightness of youth. Teachers knew her as attentive but not overbearing, a student who absorbed lessons without unnecessary attention and who interacted with peers with the ease of someone accustomed to cooperative social norms. Her friendships were characterized by trust and camaraderie, small acts of generosity and support, the subtle negotiations of adolescence that included shared secrets, exchanged advice, and quiet companionship. Tammy's engagement with the world outside her home mirrored her inner life, careful, considered, trusting, and unprepared for the insidious intrusion that would soon distort everything she knew. Even the physical spaces she occupied reflected a vulnerability defined by routine and trust. Her room, her school, the route she took to visit friends or run errands, were all mapped in the expectations of safety. She did not need to look over her shoulder or question the intentions of those she knew. The homogeneity of her suburban environment, the predictability of her family life, and the ordinariness of her daily engagements provided a false sense of protection. Each step she took was guided by a belief in normalcy, a belief that would soon be shattered. The intersection of her innocence with the calculated intentions of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka marked the most poignant aspect of her story. Tammy existed not only as a singular life taken too soon but as a symbol of the ways in which vulnerability, trust, and the ordinariness of adolescence can be exploited. Her laughter, her attentiveness, her quiet gestures of empathy and kindness were qualities that, in a cruel irony, facilitated her entry into the web of manipulation orchestrated by two people she believed she could trust. Her life, though brief, was textured with the details of a normal adolescence, the smell of homemade meals, the sound of footsteps on wooden floors, the feel of her schoolbooks in her arms, the rhythm of laughter and conversation in her home and school. Every detail that constituted comfort, safety, and normalcy became intertwined with the mechanisms of control and terror that Bernardo and Homolka were preparing to impose. Tammy's story, at this stage, is one of ordinary human experience poised on the edge of the unimaginable, the fragile balance between trust and betrayal, between innocence and its abrupt, devastating loss. In understanding Tammy, one begins to comprehend the depth of the tragedy that would unfold. She was not simply a victim, she was a mirror of what adolescence should have been: safe, exploratory, vibrant, full of ordinary joys and gentle missteps. Her interactions with family, friends, and her surroundings were natural, instinctive, and trusting. Her presence illuminated the home, the school, and the neighborhood, adding vitality to spaces that would later become marked by grief. In every laugh, every glance, every whispered conversation, she represented the ordinariness of life, a life that, in its vulnerability, highlighted the extraordinary cruelty she would soon encounter. Tammy Homolka's story, in its everyday richness and inescapable humanity, sets the emotional foundation for understanding the events that followed. She was a 14-year-old girl living within a world that, from the outside, appeared safe and predictable. She navigated her life with trust, kindness, and the instinctive curiosity of youth, unaware that her ordinary actions and routines would intersect with the calculated malevolence of two adults whose outward normalcy masked an internal landscape of horror. The contours of her daily existence, the mundane, the familiar, the seemingly innocuous, became the canvas upon which the first act of tragedy would be painted. Tammy's life, in all its quiet detail and ordinary beauty, underscores the depth of the loss and the human cost of evil cloaked in the guise of normalcy. Her story, therefore, is not merely a chronicle of victimhood, it is an illustration of life lived fully and authentically, a testament to the ordinary human experiences of family, friendship, and adolescence. Every small detail, the arrangement of her room, the tone of her conversations, the laughter she shared with her sister, the trust she placed in those around her is imbued with the poignancy of what was lost. Tammy was a nexus of vulnerability, innocence, and potential, and in understanding her, we begin to perceive the magnitude of what was taken, the emotional resonance that would reverberate through the family, the community, and ultimately, the entire nation. The day began like any other, sunlight slipping through the thin curtains of suburban homes, casting soft patterns across bedrooms where teenagers stirred, stretching under the promise of a morning filled with routine. Outside, the streets were quiet except for the occasional hum of a passing car, a school bus turning its corner, the rustle of leaves caught in a gentle breeze. The world seemed safe, predictable, ordinary. Tammy Homoka moved through her morning with the habitual rhythm of adolescence, tying her shoelaces carefully, making small talk with her parents as breakfast simmered on the stove, checking her backpack to ensure she had everything she needed for school. In those moments, nothing hinted at the horror that lay just beyond the threshold of her life. Paul Bernardo watched with a calculating patience, the quiet intensity behind his eyes betraying nothing to the casual observer. Every glance, every gesture, every conversation was measured, deliberate, as though he were orchestrating a performance in which he alone understood the script. Beside him, Carla Homoka mirrored a different kind of preparation, one that relied on the subtle manipulation of trust. Her movements were familiar, comforting, almost sisterly, but beneath them lay an acquiescence to the darker impulses that Paul nurtured. Together, they formed a partnership of precision, a coiled strategy hidden beneath the guise of normalcy, ready to exploit the small vulnerabilities of a young girl who trusted them implicitly. The plan was executed with the kind of meticulous attention that spoke to both opportunity and cruelty. In the safety of her own home, Tammy was offered a drink, a gesture so ordinary it concealed the intent behind it. The chemicals in the liquid worked silently, invisibly, numbing her awareness, dulling the sharpness of intuition, and leaving her vulnerable to forces that could not be anticipated. The betrayal was intimate, terrifying in its closeness. Those who she believed were protectors, companions in the ordinary rhythms of her life, were the very agents of her undoing. Once incapacitated, Tammy's world narrowed to the edges of sensation, a blur of movement, shapes distorted in a haze, the faint outlines of faces that should have been familiar but now loomed with menace. Paul's presence was overwhelming, controlling, dictating the rhythm of events with a relentless authority, while Carla's compliance enabled every action to proceed with horrifying efficiency. Every instinct that might have warned her of danger was dulled, every sense of personal autonomy stripped away. She became a passive participant in a nightmare that unfolded around her with brutal certainty, the ordinary context of home, kitchen, and family now transformed into a stage for violence. The violation was physical, psychological, and deeply invasive, leaving scars that transcended the immediate moment. Tammy experienced the cruel orchestration of control, a calculated domination that left her powerless to resist or comprehend. Her struggle, though instinctive and desperate, was met with a relentless manipulation that turned her body and her environment into instruments of torment. Each motion, each gesture, each whispered word or touch was part of a choreography designed to assert absolute control and erase resistance. The intimacy of the space, once protective, magnified the horror, turning familiar walls, familiar furniture, and familiar family spaces into silent witnesses to cruelty. The psychological impact of the event was as severe as the physical. Tammy's mind, even in moments of incapacitation, tried to map, to make sense of the incomprehensible, to locate any thread of safety or potential escape. Yet the deliberate orchestration of Bernardo and Homoka left no room for resistance, no avenue for appeal. Her consciousness became a battlefield where confusion, fear, and instinct collided, her natural trust and innocence weaponized against her. The realization that those she loved and trusted had betrayed her fundamentally destabilized the framework of her understanding, leaving her suspended between recognition and terror, comprehension and paralysis. The culmination of the assault was devastatingly final. In the midst of the act, an accident occurred, a tragic moment of suffocation that extinguished life where it had not yet fully blossomed. Tammy's young life, brimming with potential, laughter, and ordinary dreams, ended in the quiet aftermath of manipulation, betrayal, and cruelty. The very spaces that had once been sources of safety, the kitchen table, the hallway, the bedroom, became silent markers of her absence, ordinary walls now haunted with the weight of what had occurred. The horror was not punctuated by chaos or public spectacle. It was intimate, private, terrifying in its quiet efficiency, a cruelty that left no witnesses beyond the perpetrators themselves. In the days that followed, the ordinary rhythms of the household attempted to continue. Meals were eaten, routines maintained, and conversations occurred as if nothing had changed. Yet beneath the surface, a fracture had formed, a hidden scar that would never be visible but could never be healed. The mechanics of secrecy and denial became tools of survival for the perpetrators, who carefully constructed narratives to obscure the truth from family, friends, and the wider community. Every interaction became an act of performance, every smile a mask, every explanation a thread in a tapestry of deception. The immediate environment, once familiar and comforting, became a repository of trauma. Tammy's bedroom, the space she had inhabited with innocence and routine, became a silent witness to violation and death. Every object, every surface, carried the imprint of what had occurred, a chilling testament to the abrupt intrusion of malevolence into the ordinary. The ordinary textures of her life, the softness of bed linens, the smooth surface of a desk, the framed photographs on a shelf, were now interlaced with horror, memory, and the irrevocable loss of safety. Even the people closest to Tammy felt the subtle shift in reality without initially understanding its magnitude. Family interactions continued under the pressure of denial and confusion, moments of laughter and casual conversation overlaying the deep, unspoken recognition that something irreversible had occurred. Friends sensed the absence, the silence, the subtle changes in energy, while the perpetrators maintained the delicate balance of appearances, ensuring that no outward sign betrayed the depth of their actions. The ordinary world carried on, oblivious to the intimate horror that had unfolded behind closed doors, while Tammy's life, vibrant and ordinary just hours before, had been reduced to absence and memory. The actions of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka in that period exemplified a calculated and chilling method of domination. They operated with precision, ensuring that every movement, every choice, every act was designed to maximize control while minimizing the likelihood of discovery. The terror inflicted was private, intimate, and meticulously orchestrated, leaving behind a landscape of loss and trauma that extended far beyond the immediate victims. In Tammy's case, the combination of her own innocence, familial trust, and the perpetrator's manipulation created a perfect intersection of vulnerability and predation. The incident itself was a turning point not because it was public, but because it marked the inception of a series of acts that would escalate in scope, audacity, and brutality. The methods, the manipulation, and the psychological framework used during this first tragedy would inform subsequent actions, establishing patterns of control, coercion, and concealment that would define the trajectory of the crimes that followed. Tammy's death was not an isolated event but the first link in a chain of horror that would reverberate through neighborhoods, courts, and the collective consciousness of a nation. Even as the perpetrators moved on with daily life, the gravity of the incident lingered in its silence. The ordinary textures of suburban existence, the hum of kitchen appliances, the distant laughter of neighbors, the smell of fresh bread from a local bakery, became haunting in their contrast to the extraordinary violation that had occurred. The ordinary was now forever interlaced with trauma, memory, and loss, a stark reminder that the boundary between safety and danger can be perilously thin. Tammy's story, tragically cut short, illustrates the horrifying precision with which Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka exercised control. It demonstrates how vulnerability, trust, and innocence can be exploited by those who are attuned to the rhythms of everyday life, how ordinary spaces can be transformed into sites of terror, and how the quiet continuity of suburban routines can mask the extraordinary cruelty taking place within. Her life, though brief, forms the emotional and psychological fulcrum around which the understanding of subsequent events pivots, highlighting the stakes, the methods, and the chilling intimacy of the horror that would come to define this chapter of true crime history. Her experience serves as a stark and unflinching entry point into the broader narrative, revealing the mechanisms of manipulation, the orchestration of fear, and the cruel subversion of trust that Bernardo and Homolka employed. Through her story, the psychological landscape of the perpetrators becomes visible, the meticulous planning and the capacity for deception are illuminated, and the profound human cost of these crimes is rendered tangible, visceral, and unforgettable. Tammy Homoka's life, in its ordinary beauty and its catastrophic end, becomes the lens through which the unfolding tragedy is first understood, setting the stage for the full, devastating impact of the events that were to follow. When Leslie Mahaffey disappeared, the suburban streets of Ontario maintained their veneer of calm, but an undercurrent of unease began to ripple through the community. Leslie, a 14-year-old with a shy smile and a quiet intelligence, had vanished from her routine without a trace, leaving behind only the faintest echoes of a life interrupted. The initial realization of her absence was subtle: a missed school bell, a lunch left untouched, a call unanswered. Parents, teachers, and friends felt the first prickle of fear, a hesitation that signaled that something was wrong. But the ordinary patterns of life, neighbors tending to lawns, traffic humming along streets, the rhythm of daily errands, continued as if oblivious, underscoring how easily danger could slip unnoticed into spaces presumed safe. The discovery of Leslie's fate was gradual, marked by a series of chilling revelations. When police began their investigation, they were confronted with a scene that combined both meticulous planning and a sense of chaotic cruelty. Leslie's remains were eventually found in a cottage belonging to the perpetrators, submerged in water, wrapped in plastic, a grotesque testament to the deliberate concealment of life extinguished. The room itself was almost clinical in its arrangement, objects moved to obscure traces, careful attempts to manipulate the environment to hide the evidence. It was a space transformed from ordinary domesticity into a tableau of horror, where everyday objects became instruments of concealment and control. As investigators examined the cottage, the level of planning became apparent. The water tank where Leslie was confined reflected a premeditation that went beyond spontaneous violence. Every item in the room, every angle of the walls, every potential witness had been considered, showing a cold, calculating mind at work. Evidence was layered in such a way that it required careful, methodical unraveling to expose the truth. The perpetrators had anticipated the arrival of authorities, creating a temporary illusion of normalcy even in the aftermath of their crime. Forensic teams moved cautiously, documenting every detail, aware that the smallest oversight could erase the fragile threads of proof that linked the perpetrators to the atrocity. Leslie's interactions prior to her abduction were examined minutely. Friends recalled casual moments of routine, conversations about homework, plans for after-school activities, and the ordinary gestures of adolescent friendship. None could have foreseen the trajectory that would lead to her captivity. The pattern mirrored that of Tammy Homoka, an ordinary adolescent, moving through familiar spaces, whose trust and routine had been weaponized against her. The psychological dimension of the crime became evident as authorities pieced together how the perpetrators exploited trust, manipulated environment, and orchestrated fear, demonstrating a sinister understanding of human behavior and adolescent vulnerability. The physical evidence told a story as chilling as the testimony. Fibers from clothing, traces of substances used to sedate, and the positioning of objects within the space all pointed to a deliberate choreography of terror. It was as though the perpetrators had transformed the cottage into a stage for their private narrative, a place where control, domination, and concealment converged. Every detail, the angle of a wall, the depth of water in a container, the arrangement of restraints, spoke to the psychological calculation embedded in the crime. The ordinary domestic architecture of the home, which in most contexts would suggest safety and routine, became a framework within which horror was executed. Community members were confronted with the horrifying juxtaposition of normality and atrocity. The streets they walked, the homes they inhabited, and the families they trusted now seemed to harbor shadows. Police officers recounted the meticulousness required to navigate the scene, noting how the perpetrator's ability to blend ordinary domestic spaces with acts of violence complicated the investigation. Every closet, every cupboard, every room became a potential repository of secrets, forcing investigators to reconcile the ordinariness of the environment with the extraordinary cruelty that had occurred. The discovery of Kristen French further compounded the community's trauma. She was 15, vibrant and curious, a girl whose life intersected with that of the perpetrators in ways that would soon illustrate a terrifying pattern. Kristen's captivity revealed the same horrifying combination of psychological and physical manipulation seen in previous incidents. The location where she was held, the methods used to control her, and the eventual manner of her death were all extensions of the perpetrator's established modus operandi. Each act of concealment, the selection of the space, the arrangement of restraints, the manipulation of her environment, demonstrated a chilling precision and a willingness to exploit trust to the utmost extent. Investigators began to see the emerging pattern, recognizing the repeated use of certain spaces, objects, and methods to achieve control. The cottage and its contents became central to understanding the psychological mechanics of the perpetrators. Evidence collected was painstakingly catalogued: video recordings, restraints, chemical substances, and personal items all served as tangible links to the crimes. Each piece provided insight into the mindset and methods of the perpetrators, illustrating the convergence of planning, cruelty, and the manipulation of human vulnerability. Every new discovery was accompanied by the emotional weight carried by family members and the wider community. Parents of missing children felt a creeping dread, while neighbors struggled to reconcile the visible calm of their streets with the invisible horrors that had unfolded. Police reports detailed the careful unraveling of the crimes, the painstaking examination of forensic evidence, and the painstaking interviews required to piece together the timeline. Each small detail, scratches on furniture, chemical traces, videotape footage, served as an anchor, grounding the investigation in the tangible reality of the crimes while amplifying the emotional resonance of the victims' experiences. The physical spaces themselves became haunting symbols of duality. Ordinary rooms, kitchens, and bedrooms, once associated with safety and family life, were revealed as stages of meticulous cruelty. Investigators and community members alike were forced to confront the idea that spaces could be weaponized, that the familiar could mask the unimaginable. The cottage, with its deliberate concealments and orchestrated horrors, stood as a testament to the perpetrator's manipulation of environment, trust, and routine. It became both a crime scene and a psychological landscape, reflecting the calculated intersection of domesticity and depravity. In examining the man-made details of the crime scene, investigators noted the sophistication with which the perpetrators executed their plans. Locks were chosen, restraints placed, and environmental variables controlled with precision. Every element served a dual purpose: to dominate the victims and to conceal the crime. The ordinary textures of the environment, the smoothness of floors, the layout of furniture, the positioning of containers were co-opted to serve acts of violence. This meticulous orchestration forced the investigative team to confront a reality in which cruelty and domestic normalcy existed in seamless integration. The discovery of evidence extended beyond physical objects. Testimonies from neighbors, friends, and casual observers became crucial pieces of the puzzle, each adding texture to the understanding of events. Seemingly trivial observations: a car parked in an unusual spot, a visit at an unexpected hour, a faint sound heard from within a house, provided context for the timing, behavior, and methods of the perpetrators. Each narrative was cross-referenced against physical evidence, slowly forming a mosaic of the crime that revealed the depth of planning, psychological manipulation, and methodical execution. The juxtaposition of ordinary suburban life and the extraordinary horror hidden within it created a psychological tension that permeated every facet of the discovery process. Investigators moved cautiously through familiar spaces, aware that the ordinary could conceal the horrific. Every room, hallway, and domestic object was scrutinized for evidence, every trace of interaction between perpetrator and victim carefully documented. The methodical nature of the investigation mirrored the methodical nature of the crimes themselves, revealing a disturbing symmetry between the orchestration of horror and the unraveling of truth. As the investigation progressed, the cottage and other locations associated with the perpetrators became symbols of both cruelty and the painstaking work required to confront it. Evidence of abuse, manipulation, and death was catalogued, photographed, and preserved, serving both as proof of crime and as a reminder of the intimate nature of terror. Every ordinary object, the linens, the containers, the furniture, was recontextualized as part of a narrative of domination and concealment. The ordinary environment became a lens through which the extraordinary cruelty of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka was rendered visible, stark, and undeniable. Through this painstaking process, law enforcement and the community began to grasp the calculated nature of the crimes. The discovery phase was not marked by dramatic confrontations or overt displays of violence. It was methodical, slow, and deeply unsettling in its quiet efficiency. The ordinary textures of home, suburban street, and family life became both setting and evidence, demonstrating how trust and routine could be manipulated to devastating effect. Each uncovered detail, each painstakingly documented item, contributed to the unfolding understanding of the psychological and physical dimensions of the perpetrator's actions. The landscape of discovery, both physical and emotional, illustrated the duality of horror and normalcy. Ordinary suburban streets, once symbols of safety and community, were revealed as the backdrop for calculated cruelty. Homes, furniture, and rooms became repositories of evidence, reflecting the meticulous orchestration of fear and control. Families, neighbors, and investigators confronted the dissonance between outward appearances and hidden atrocities, a dissonance that underscored the depth of betrayal and the vulnerability of ordinary life. The discovery of evidence, from physical traces to patterns of behavior, laid the foundation for understanding the crimes, illuminating the intersection of environment, psychology, and premeditated violence in ways that would shape the entire narrative. By the time all evidence had been gathered and analyzed, the cottage and related locations had become not just crime scenes, but psychological landscapes, reflecting the calculated cruelty, meticulous planning, and exploitation of trust that defined these acts. The ordinary had been transformed into the extraordinary, a landscape where every object, gesture, and room contributed to the chilling story. The work of discovery was both a forensic and a psychological endeavor, exposing the depth of depravity hidden beneath suburban normalcy and establishing a foundation for the pursuit of justice that would follow. As the scope of the crimes became undeniable, law enforcement found themselves navigating a labyrinth of deception, manipulation, and fear. Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka, outwardly ordinary figures within suburban Ontario, had woven a web of lies so intricate that distinguishing reality from facade required painstaking scrutiny. The first hours of the investigation were marked by an almost suffocating tension. Detectives interviewed neighbors, friends, and family members, seeking anomalies in behavior, inconsistencies in accounts, and the faintest indications that the smiling, polite couple next door could be capable of unimaginable cruelty. Every witness, every casual observation, became a potential clue, a thread that could unravel the tightly held secrets of two people who had learned to blend normalcy with malevolence. The detectives' early encounters with Bernardo revealed a man who exuded control, calm, and an unsettling composure. He answered questions with precision, offering carefully constructed narratives designed to misdirect and placate. His eyes, steady and calculating, betrayed nothing, concealing the violence lurking beneath a veneer of civility. With Carla, the dynamic was different but equally complex. She presented herself as cooperative, almost apologetic, her demeanor carefully calibrated to evoke sympathy and trust. But beneath the surface, there were subtle signs of complicity, fleeting glances, small contradictions, gestures that betrayed an awareness of circumstances she claimed not to fully understand. Together, they formed a dual front, one commanding fear and manipulation, the other cloaked in feigned innocence, creating an obstacle that investigators had to navigate with extreme caution and meticulous attention to detail. The investigation initially encountered dead ends, each lead tangled in layers of deception. Friends and family, unable to reconcile the evidence with the personalities they knew, often provided accounts that were incomplete or skewed by denial. Even minor discrepancies were difficult to interpret, a casual remark in passing, a misremembered schedule, the absence of a routine activity. Detectives had to sift through countless trivialities, understanding that within the mundane could lie the seeds of revelation. The painstaking work of cross-referencing interviews, verifying alibis, and establishing timelines became the backbone of the investigation, and every misstep in perception had the potential to allow the perpetrator's carefully maintained facade to persist. Meanwhile, Bernardo and Homolka's behavior offered subtle clues for those patient enough to notice. Patterns emerged in their social interactions, a meticulousness in controlling appearances, an insistence on normalcy that itself became a form of evidence. Small acts, the careful staging of rooms, the rehearsed narratives to family members, the attention to detail in social situations served as indicators of an underlying consciousness aware of wrongdoing. Investigators began to recognize these behaviors not as anomalies but as deliberate strategies, a calculated orchestration of perception designed to insulate them from scrutiny. The deeper detectives looked, the more they realized the sophistication of the criminal partnership they faced. As forensic evidence accumulated, the picture of complicity and premeditation became undeniable. Items recovered from the homes of the perpetrators, coupled with videotaped recordings, revealed a meticulous approach to both crime and concealment. Physical traces, fibers, residues, and other forensic markers linked the perpetrators to multiple scenes of abduction, assault, and death. These traces were not random. They indicated planning, an awareness of investigative processes, and an intent to manipulate or obscure detection. Forensic teams labored through hours of evidence, reconstructing events minute by minute, placing victims within contexts that illuminated the perpetrator's methods and intentions. Yet despite the mounting evidence, the investigation faced psychological and procedural obstacles. Carla's cooperation and carefully negotiated narratives complicated the establishment of culpability. Detectives had to distinguish between her claims of passive involvement and the reality indicated by physical and testimonial evidence. Every confession, every recollection, every admission had to be scrutinized for authenticity, for manipulation, for omission. The challenge was compounded by the emotional weight carried by the victims' families, whose grief and confusion were palpable in every interaction. Investigators had to maintain analytical rigor while contending with the human cost of the crimes, a delicate balance between methodical pursuit of truth and the compassionate management of trauma. The process of narrowing suspects to the principal actors required an extraordinary attention to behavioral analysis. Bernardo exhibited traits that aligned with known patterns of sexual predation, meticulous planning, exploitation of trust, sadistic control, and a calculated use of fear to dominate victims. Homoka's complicity was more subtle but equally significant. Her knowledge of the crimes, facilitation of abduction, and involvement in manipulation indicated a partnership that blurred the lines between coercion and voluntary participation. Detectives had to parse these dynamics carefully, constructing an understanding of motive, intent, and capacity that would withstand scrutiny in court. The psychological profiling of both individuals became as crucial as physical evidence in building the case. As investigators delved deeper, they also faced the challenge of reconciling public perception with the stark realities of the crimes. The Ken and Barbie image of Bernardo and Homoka, handsome, polished, seemingly normal, contrasted sharply with the brutality revealed in forensic and testimonial evidence. This dichotomy complicated efforts to generate community cooperation, as neighbors and acquaintances struggled to reconcile the outward charm of the couple with the horror of their actions. Each new interview was approached with careful sensitivity, understanding that fear, disbelief, and denial could impede the flow of critical information. The investigation required a delicate blend of forensic precision, psychological insight, and empathetic communication. Dead ends in the early investigation forced detectives to employ creative strategies. They revisited overlooked locations, re-interviewed witnesses multiple times, and reanalyzed physical evidence with emerging techniques. Every discarded lead was re-evaluated, every minor inconsistency in testimonies re-examined. The process was exhaustive and grueling, as the perpetrator's meticulous care had rendered the truth opaque. Yet persistent attention to detail gradually illuminated the underlying patterns, the use of chemical sedation, the methods of control, the concealment strategies, and the repetitive, ritualized aspects of the assaults. Each element reinforced the growing understanding that these were not isolated incidents but components of a structured, deliberate pattern of criminal behavior. The investigation's early months were marked by frustration and urgency. Families of the missing girls pressed for answers, the media scrutinized every step, and law enforcement operated under intense public pressure. Yet through careful procedural rigor, detectives began assembling the fragmented pieces into a coherent narrative. Corroboration between physical evidence and testimonial accounts solidified suspicions, and the eventual discovery of videotaped assaults provided incontrovertible proof of the perpetrator's actions. The painstaking labor of connecting these disparate pieces underscored both the complexity of the crimes and the deliberate, methodical approach of the perpetrators. In the labyrinth of investigation, even the smallest breakthroughs were monumental. A fragment of fiber, an overlooked detail in an interview, or the subtle misstep of the perpetrators could pivot the investigation closer to resolution. Each success required a careful calibration of analytical skill, patience, and psychological insight. Detectives were not merely reconstructing events, they were decoding the mindset, motivations, and methodologies of individuals who had mastered deception and cruelty, a process that demanded both forensic and human intelligence. Ultimately, the investigation illuminated the terrifying duality of Bernardo and Homolka. They were capable of charm, normalcy, and social engagement, yet simultaneously orchestrated acts of profound violence with meticulous attention to detail. Every step of the investigation reinforced the complexity of the case, the interplay of psychological manipulation, physical evidence, and procedural challenges created a multidimensional puzzle. Each piece uncovered brought the investigators closer to truth but also deeper into the understanding of the calculated depravity that had unfolded behind the masks of suburban normalcy. The detective work, though grueling and often painstakingly slow, revealed the core of the criminal partnership. Bernardo's predatory control and Homolka's complicity coalesced into a pattern of abuse, manipulation, and concealment that transcended ordinary criminality. Each victim's experience was a reflection of the perpetrator's psychological dominance, and each fragment of evidence confirmed the premeditation, sophistication, and chilling intimacy of the crimes. The investigation, in its depth and persistence, became not just a process of law enforcement but an exercise in understanding human cruelty and the vulnerabilities it exploits. By the conclusion of the investigative phase, law enforcement had constructed a comprehensive, multidimensional understanding of both perpetrators. The intertwining of physical evidence, behavioral analysis, and witness testimony provided a framework that would support eventual prosecution. Yet even as arrests loomed, the investigation's complexity underscored the chilling truth. Two individuals, seemingly ordinary in appearance and behavior, had engineered and executed a series of atrocities that exploited the very trust and routines that sustain human life. The pursuit of justice would require unraveling not just the physical acts of violence but the psychological architecture that enabled such horror to unfold undetected for years. The breakthrough in the case came not as a sudden explosion of revelation but as the culmination of months of painstaking investigation, subtle observations, and relentless persistence. Police had meticulously pieced together timelines, cross-referenced witness statements, and analyzed every fiber, chemical trace, and object recovered from the crime scenes. Yet the case remained elusive, obscured by layers of deception meticulously constructed by Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. The turning point was rooted in the realization that while the perpetrators had attempted to control every external factor, they had left behind internal inconsistencies, behavioral footprints that no amount of outward normalcy could erase. Detectives, attuned to these subtle signals, began to see patterns that had previously been dismissed or overlooked. The first crack in the facade appeared when investigators reviewed the videotapes recovered from the perpetrator's home. At first glance, the recordings were disturbing for their content, but it was the details within them, the interactions, the mannerisms, the consistency of narrative that provided the most critical clues. The videos documented acts of violence with a cold, methodical clarity, yet they inadvertently captured gestures and behaviors that revealed the underlying dynamics of coercion and complicity. Bernardo's demeanor was one of absolute control, the subtle tightening of his jaw, the deliberate cadence of his speech, the measured precision in his physical dominance over the victims. Homolka, by contrast, appeared almost peripheral yet present, her gestures and expressions betraying an intimate familiarity with the actions unfolding, an awareness that would later become pivotal in assessing her level of participation. Forensic analysis reinforced what the investigators had begun to suspect. Chemical residues and biological evidence matched precisely with the descriptions of the assaults provided by witness interviews and circumstantial reports. Fibers from clothing and personal items linked the perpetrators to multiple crime scenes across different locations. The sheer consistency of the evidence, converging from separate domains, created an irrefutable foundation upon which authorities could confront the duo. Each piece of evidence was like a stitch in a larger tapestry, illustrating a meticulously orchestrated series of crimes that had been carefully concealed but ultimately could not escape the scrutiny of scientific and observational methods. The psychological profiling of both Bernardo and Homolka began to play a decisive role. Profilers analyzed the videos, testimonies, and crime scene behaviors, constructing a detailed map of their interactions, dominance patterns, and manipulative strategies. Bernardo's sadistic tendencies, meticulous planning, and compulsive need for control were identified as central to the orchestration of the crimes. Homolka's behavior, initially portrayed as passive compliance, was reassessed in light of emerging evidence, revealing moments of active participation, strategic facilitation, and tacit encouragement that undermined her public narrative. Investigators began to understand that while Bernardo initiated the violence, Homolka's involvement was neither incidental nor coerced entirely. She was an essential component of the operational dynamic that had allowed the crimes to escalate with such precision and audacity. The breakthrough solidified when authorities discovered documentation and small, seemingly innocuous items that had previously escaped scrutiny. Receipts, personal notes, minor household objects, and overlooked videotape segments revealed patterns of premeditation, trips, purchases, and logistical arrangements that aligned perfectly with the timing of the abductions and assaults. These mundane objects, when interpreted correctly, illuminated the careful choreography behind the crimes. Investigators recognized that these small details were not random but integral components of a carefully controlled environment, each chosen to facilitate domination, concealment, and the execution of violent acts. As investigators began to consolidate this evidence, they also revisited interviews with friends, neighbors, and family members, seeking contradictions, inconsistencies, or admissions that might further implicate the perpetrators. Each re-interview was a careful dance of observation and questioning. Subtle reactions, hesitations, flickers of recognition, changes in tone or body language became critical markers, guiding the investigative team toward previously hidden truths. The human element of observation, coupled with scientific analysis, provided a multidimensional breakthrough that went beyond physical evidence, exposing the psychological and behavioral fingerprints of both perpetrators. The cumulative impact of these discoveries created a clear trajectory toward arrest. The authorities now possessed a robust mosaic of evidence: the videotapes, forensic analyses, eyewitness accounts, behavioral profiles, and documentation of premeditation. Each component reinforced the others, leaving little room for ambiguity. Investigators could reconstruct the chronology of crimes with astonishing precision, mapping each act of abduction, assault, and concealment to the perpetrator's actions and decisions. The breakthrough was not a single moment of revelation but the intersection of relentless observation, scientific rigor, and psychological insight. When law enforcement moved to act on this breakthrough, the arrest of Paul Bernardo was executed with careful planning. Officers approached with the awareness of his dangerousness, noting that any misstep could escalate into further violence. Bernardo's reaction, initially calm and controlled, quickly shifted to subtle signs of tension: a tightening of fists, a barely perceptible narrowing of the eyes, a faint tremor in the jaw that betrayed the first recognition that his control was being challenged. The arrest was both procedural and symbolic, a moment when months of painstaking investigation intersected with the tangible reality of law enforcement asserting dominance over someone who had so long controlled the environment around him. Karla Homolka's arrest followed a similar pattern, though her demeanor contrasted sharply with Bernardo's. She presented a mixture of composure and anxious calculation, a careful calibration of cooperation and self-preservation. Investigators observed her expressions, her tone, her choice of words, each scrutinized for authenticity. Her compliance during questioning, when contrasted with earlier narratives of naivety or ignorance, provided further insight into her role. The juxtaposition of her outwardly cooperative behavior and the emerging evidence of her involvement highlighted the complex psychological dynamics that had allowed the crimes to continue undetected for so long. The breakthrough also extended into the broader public consciousness. Media coverage, once speculative, began to reflect the depth and precision of the evidence accumulated by law enforcement. The narrative shifted from fear of the unknown to a chilling understanding of calculated malevolence operating within seemingly ordinary lives. Families of victims, while grappling with the magnitude of the revelations, found a measure of validation in the methodical confirmation of their worst fears, that the individuals they had trusted, who had moved within their communities unnoticed, were responsible for unspeakable crimes. Legally, the breakthrough provided the foundation for prosecutorial strategy. The combination of physical evidence, psychological profiling, and detailed behavioral reconstruction enabled prosecutors to formulate charges with certainty. The videotapes, in particular, were pivotal. They offered incontrovertible proof of both the acts of violence and the perpetrators' active roles. The case now moved beyond suspicion and circumstantial evidence into a realm where deliberate, documented actions could be presented in court. Investigators and prosecutors collaborated closely, ensuring that the full complexity of the crimes could be communicated effectively while preserving the integrity of the evidence. Behind the scenes, the psychological toll on investigators was profound. Repeated exposure to the videos, crime scenes, and testimonies required careful management to prevent desensitization or emotional burnout. Each breakthrough, while exhilarating in its contribution to resolving the case, carried with it the weight of human suffering. Detectives often grappled with the juxtaposition of procedural success and the harrowing nature of the crimes they were confronting. The breakthrough was as much an emotional reckoning as a professional achievement, a recognition that the pursuit of justice entailed direct engagement with the darkest capacities of human behavior. The breakthrough also illuminated a crucial truth about the nature of evil and complicity. While Bernardo's role as instigator and executor of violence was undeniable, Homolka's participation revealed the intricate dynamics of manipulation, facilitation, and shared responsibility. Investigators realized that understanding the crimes required moving beyond simplistic categorizations of victim and perpetrator, recognizing instead the nuanced interplay of coercion, consent, and agency that defined their actions. This insight would later become central in both prosecution and public discourse, challenging assumptions about complicity, morality, and the administration of justice. In the days following the breakthrough, investigators meticulously documented every detail, preparing for the transition from discovery to prosecution. Each piece of evidence, each testimonial nuance, each psychological observation was catalogued, analyzed, and incorporated into a comprehensive understanding of the crimes. The breakthrough represented not only a turning point in the investigation but also the threshold of accountability, the moment when months of painstaking work crystallized into the possibility of legal reckoning. It was the point at which hidden patterns, deceptive appearances, and meticulous manipulation could no longer shield the perpetrators from scrutiny, and the weight of their actions would finally be confronted in a forum capable of delivering justice. The significance of the breakthrough lay not only in the apprehension of the perpetrators but in the exposure of the mechanisms that had allowed their crimes to persist. It illuminated the intersection of planning, psychological manipulation, and environmental exploitation that defined their actions. The breakthrough transformed abstract suspicion into concrete understanding, revealing the full scope of horror while providing the tools necessary to hold the perpetrators accountable. It was the moment when the carefully constructed facade of normalcy finally began to crumble, and the relentless pursuit of truth, driven by observation, analysis, and persistence, reached a decisive, irreversible point. The courtroom was a space charged with tension, the kind that presses against the skin and settles into every corner of the room, a physical manifestation of the horrors that had unfolded in the quiet suburbs of Ontario. Paul Bernardo sat rigid, his posture exacting, every muscle taut with a controlled intensity that mirrored the meticulous precision he had exhibited throughout his crimes. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room with calculated detachment, as if measuring reactions and recording each subtle cue, his mind still anchored in strategy even as the weight of evidence mounted against him. Beside him, Karla Homolka's presence was markedly different, a combination of nervous energy and studied composure. She shifted slightly, hands clasped tightly, lips pressed together in an attempt to mask the flicker of anxiety that betrayed her awareness of the gravity of the moment and her own entanglement in the crimes. From the opening gavel, the proceedings unfolded as a careful choreography between prosecution and defense, each side aware of the magnitude of the case and the eyes of the nation upon them. The prosecution moved deliberately, presenting evidence with a methodical rhythm, juxtaposing photographs, forensic reports, and the harrowing videotaped recordings that captured the atrocities. Each exhibit was delivered with precision, contextualized within a narrative that detailed not only the acts themselves but the chilling orchestration behind them. Witnesses, from neighbors to family members to forensic experts, were brought in one by one, each recounting moments of observation or analysis that collectively illuminated the systematic nature of the crimes. The defense sought to challenge these accounts, to cast doubt upon motivations, intent, and interpretation. Bernardo's legal team emphasized his outward appearance of normalcy, attempting to distance him from the perception of inherent malevolence, while Karla Homolka's lawyers highlighted her cooperation, her plea agreement, and arguments of duress or coercion in her participation. Yet the courtroom itself seemed to resist these narratives. Every detail of the evidence, the videos, the forensic analysis, the precise documentation of timelines, converged in ways that left little room for ambiguity. The juxtaposition of the perpetrator's ordinary exterior with the extraordinary cruelty documented by investigators created a tension that was palpable, a cognitive dissonance that permeated the room and pressed upon everyone present. As testimony unfolded, the human cost of the crimes was made undeniable. Family members recounted their grief, their shock, their moments of helplessness. Parents described the daily routines that had been shattered, the ordinary life that had been invaded by violence, and the trauma of discovering what had been inflicted upon their children. Friends spoke of missed signals, of casual encounters that, in retrospect, carried sinister undertones, revealing the subtle manipulations that had allowed the perpetrators to operate within the community without detection. Each account, each recollection, was laden with emotion, embedding the narrative of crime within the lived experience of those left behind. The courtroom became a stage where both psychological dynamics and legal principles intersected. The jury was tasked with parsing not only the concrete evidence but also the nuanced interplay of coercion, agency, and complicity. The prosecution highlighted the deliberate planning, the repeated patterns of abduction, assault, and concealment, emphasizing the calculated nature of the crimes. They detailed how Bernardo's sadistic control was amplified by Homolka's participation, presenting evidence that demonstrated her facilitation of abductions, knowledge of drug use to incapacitate victims, and active presence during the assaults. Each element reinforced the conclusion that this was a partnership, a coordinated execution of violence that transcended mere opportunism. The defense attempted to fragment this narrative, presenting alternate interpretations, character witnesses, and psychological assessments intended to humanize the perpetrators, particularly Homolka, whose plea agreement was central to the strategy. They argued for a distinction between degrees of responsibility, emphasizing legal technicalities and mitigating circumstances. Yet the sheer weight of documentation, the videotapes, forensic reports, and corroborated testimony created an almost inescapable clarity. The audience, the jury, and even the attorneys themselves could not ignore the meticulous orchestration of harm and the evident awareness of consequences displayed by both individuals. As the trial progressed, the interplay of narrative and evidence became increasingly stark. The prosecution's detailed reconstruction of events, minute by minute, room by room, moment by moment, allowed the courtroom to visualize the sequence of atrocities as a continuous, deliberate chain rather than disconnected incidents. Each witness reinforced the timeline, each piece of evidence anchored the narrative in undeniable reality, and each revelation chipped away at any residual uncertainty regarding culpability. The psychological presence of the perpetrators, though masked in composure, was laid bare by their actions, their planning, and the inescapable record of their behaviors. The climax of the trial was both procedural and profoundly human. Jurors, having absorbed weeks of testimony and evidence, were confronted with the magnitude of suffering, the systematic cruelty, and the deliberate deception executed over years. The prosecution's summation wove together the strands of forensic precision, psychological insight, and emotional testimony into a narrative that emphasized both accountability and moral clarity. The defense countered with appeals to nuance, mitigation, and legal interpretation, but the cumulative force of the evidence, particularly the visual documentation of crimes and the corroborated witness accounts, created a gravitational pull toward recognition of guilt. When the verdict was finally delivered, the courtroom held its collective breath. Bernardo's face remained impassive, but a subtle rigidity suggested the recognition that his control had been breached, that the long, careful orchestration of terror could not withstand the scrutiny of law. Homoka's expression was more revealing, a flicker of apprehension and calculated resignation, signaling awareness of the consequences that had been negotiated through her plea agreement. The dichotomy of outcomes, Bernardo facing the full weight of life imprisonment without parole and Homoka receiving a negotiated sentence, provoked a mixture of relief, outrage, and reflection among those observing. The justice system had acted, but the moral and emotional complexities of the case were not easily reconciled. The courtroom itself became a space of duality, embodying both closure and dissonance. On one hand, the law had imposed definitive consequences. Bernardo's sentence represented societal condemnation, incapacitation, and an acknowledgement of the victim's suffering. On the other hand, the plea agreement with Homoka, while legally sanctioned, provoked profound debate over fairness, complicity, and the ethics of negotiated accountability in cases involving intimate participation in horrific crimes. Observers grappled with these contradictions, understanding that the legal outcomes, while concrete, could not fully encapsulate the moral dimensions or the enduring trauma inflicted upon the victims and their families. Throughout the trial, the emotional landscape of the courtroom was in constant flux. Families experienced waves of grief and, in some cases, tentative relief, yet each revelation and every recounting of the crimes renewed their confrontation with loss. Detectives and prosecutors, who had labored for years assembling the case, felt the tension of public scrutiny, the burden of ensuring that justice was both thorough and demonstrable. The media coverage amplified the emotional resonance, broadcasting the stark realities of the crimes to a wider audience and compelling society at large to confront the unsettling juxtaposition of outward normalcy and hidden depravity. The trial also revealed the intricacies of human psychology under scrutiny. Bernardo's demeanor, a combination of detachment and tension, revealed a mind accustomed to control but now contending with forces beyond manipulation. Homoka's careful navigation of emotion and composure illustrated the duality of self-preservation and complicity, the tension between truth, admission, and legal negotiation. Observers within the courtroom, from jurors to family members to law enforcement officials, were forced to witness not just the facts of the crimes but the psychological dynamics that had enabled them, an intimate exposure to the machinery of human cruelty and rationalization. Ultimately, the courtroom became a space of confrontation with reality. The legal process imposed structure on chaos, delineating culpability, reconstructing events, and rendering judgment. Yet the emotional, psychological, and moral dimensions persisted, leaving a lingering awareness that the consequences of the crimes extended far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The verdict represented a societal acknowledgement of suffering, a formal assignment of responsibility, and a commitment to accountability, but it also underscored the enduring tension between the legal resolution of crime and the human, emotional, and moral reckoning that followed. In the end, the trial of Paul Bernardo and Carla Homoka was a crucible in which evidence, psychology, and morality converged. The legal process, though meticulous and exacting, could only partially encapsulate the full scope of horror, complicity, and devastation inflicted. The courtroom bore witness not only to judgment but to the complex interplay of human behavior, manipulation, and societal response. Each sentence, each argument, each piece of evidence was a step toward justice, yet the lingering impact of the crimes, the grief, the shock, the ethical debates ensured that the courtroom's authority, while definitive, could never fully resolve the deep human consequences that had been wrought. In the aftermath of the trial, the echoes of the crimes continued to reverberate through the lives of everyone connected to them, shaping communities, families, and the collective consciousness of a nation. The suburban streets of Ontario, once symbols of safety and routine, bore an invisible scar, a quiet reminder that appearances could deceive and that evil could hide behind ordinary facades. Families of the victims faced the long, grinding reality of grief, their sorrow compounded by the intimate betrayals that had been inflicted by someone they had known, someone who had moved within their circles. The loss of Tammy Homolka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French was not only a tragedy of death but a rupture of trust, a fracture in the understanding of safety, familial bonds, and community. For many, the emotional aftermath was a complicated blend of relief, anger, and lingering trauma. The sentencing of Paul Bernardo brought a sense of closure in terms of legal accountability, yet it could not undo the past or ease the psychic weight borne by the survivors, families, and communities. Karla Homolka's plea bargain, her subsequent release, and her ability to reintegrate into society provoked ongoing debates and emotional turmoil, leaving many to wrestle with questions of justice, fairness, and the moral limits of legal negotiation. The dichotomy between legal outcome and emotional truth created an enduring tension that extended beyond courtrooms and media coverage, embedding itself in the national conversation about crime, complicity, and punishment. Communities struggled with the need to restore a sense of safety and trust while acknowledging the fragility exposed by these crimes. Schools, neighborhoods, and social networks were forced to confront uncomfortable realities about vulnerability, the potential for deception, and the ways in which evil could exist in plain sight. Parents, in particular, had to navigate the dual challenges of mourning lost children and educating their remaining families about caution, awareness, and the complexities of human behavior without succumbing to paralyzing fear. The social landscape itself had shifted, and ordinary routines were forever shadowed by awareness of what had transpired behind closed doors. Public discourse around the case evolved into a broader examination of legal, psychological, and ethical questions. The role of plea bargains in cases of extreme violence became a subject of intense scrutiny, particularly in relation to Homolka's negotiated sentence. Scholars, journalists, and legal experts debated the balance between incentivizing cooperation and ensuring proportional justice, questioning whether the pursuit of expediency in prosecution might inadvertently compromise moral accountability. The discussion extended beyond academic circles, influencing public perception, media narratives, and the collective understanding of how justice interacts with human behavior and societal norms. At the level of individual reflection, the human capacity for resilience was both tested and illuminated. Families of victims had to contend with ongoing grief, yet many found ways to channel their suffering into advocacy, awareness campaigns, and support networks for other victims of violence. Communities sought to reinforce bonds, educate children about safety, and establish resources to prevent exploitation, recognizing that the crimes were not isolated acts but indicators of broader vulnerabilities. Survivors and families navigated a landscape where the memory of horror coexisted with the need to reclaim ordinary life, a delicate balance between remembrance and forward motion. The psychological implications for those who investigated and prosecuted the case were equally profound. Detectives, forensic experts, and attorneys carried with them the burden of prolonged exposure to human cruelty, grappling with secondary trauma and the weight of responsibility to translate horror into evidence and testimony. The aftermath involved reflection on both the successes of the investigative process and the moral confrontation with acts that, while legally accounted for, defied full comprehension. Professionals involved had to reconcile the necessity of procedural rigor with the human imperative of empathy, understanding that justice demanded both precision and recognition of suffering. In the broader cultural context, the Bernardo and Homolka case became emblematic of the unsettling duality of human nature, the capacity for outward normalcy to coexist with profound depravity. Media coverage, documentaries, and public discourse repeatedly returned to the Ken and Barbie imagery, emphasizing the shocking contrast between societal perception and hidden reality. This narrative shaped public understanding of criminal psychology, reinforcing the lesson that appearances are insufficient measures of character and that vigilance, critical observation, and awareness are essential in safeguarding vulnerable populations. The case became a reference point in discussions of criminal behavior, psychological profiling, and the societal responsibilities to detect and prevent abuse. The legal legacy of the case continued to unfold long after the courtroom verdicts. Policy discussions around child protection, community safety, and prosecutorial strategies were influenced by the lessons learned, prompting reforms, procedural reviews, and ongoing examination of how systems could better respond to complex crimes involving both primary perpetrators and facilitating accomplices. Homoka's plea bargain remained a cautionary tale within the legal community, illustrating both the tactical utility of negotiated cooperation and the ethical dilemmas it presents. The aftermath underscored that the pursuit of justice extends beyond individual cases, shaping societal frameworks, legal precedents, and collective ethical awareness. Yet, amid institutional and societal reflection, the human stories persisted, anchored in the memory of those whose lives were violently cut short. Each victim's story, her hopes, friendships, family interactions, and aspirations remained central to understanding the true magnitude of loss. Memorials, personal remembrances, and public commemorations became sites of collective grief and reflection, offering spaces where sorrow and memory could coexist, ensuring that the individuals behind the headlines were not reduced to statistics or narrative devices. The human dimension of the tragedy, its intimate, painful specificity, became the lens through which society continued to grapple with the moral and emotional consequences of the crimes. In the quiet moments, beyond media scrutiny and legal analysis, the lingering impact was perhaps most palpable. The suburban homes where the perpetrators had lived, the streets they traversed, the routines they had manipulated all bore invisible traces of the events. Community awareness, once naive and trusting, was irrevocably heightened. Individuals carried a new consciousness of vulnerability, of the hidden complexities within seemingly ordinary relationships. Fear, caution, and vigilance became intertwined with grief, shaping social interactions, parental guidance, and collective memory. The aftermath was not a finite conclusion but an ongoing process of living with awareness, coping with trauma, and seeking justice in both formal and human terms. Ultimately, the story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homoka serves as both a warning and a reflection. It illustrates the capacity for evil to operate within ordinary structures, the complexities of complicity, and the challenges of translating moral understanding into legal action. It highlights the profound consequences of trust betrayed and the enduring need for vigilance, empathy, and justice. The legacy is measured not only in courtroom verdicts or media coverage but in the ways communities, families, and individuals continue to navigate the shadows left behind. The aftermath is both a reckoning with horror and a testament to resilience, a continuous negotiation between memory, justice, and the human imperative to seek understanding and protection in the face of incomprehensible cruelty. In the end, the crimes of Bernardo and Homoka did more than shock a nation, they forced a confrontation with uncomfortable truths about human nature, the fragility of social trust, and the enduring importance of vigilance and accountability. They reminded society that justice is not merely the imposition of legal consequence but the ongoing effort to reckon with trauma, prevent recurrence, and honor the lives of those lost. The aftermath is a landscape of reflection, grief, and cautious hope, a space where lessons are internalized, memories preserved, and the commitment to protect and understand remains resolute, shaping the present and influencing the future in profound, enduring ways. Years after the courtroom drama concluded and the sentences were handed down, the echoes of the Bernardo and Homoka crimes persisted, shaping lives and communities in ways that were subtle yet profound. The streets of Ontario, once symbols of ordinary suburban life, carried invisible scars. People walked past familiar houses with a heightened awareness, a quiet vigilance that mingled with lingering fear. Parents became more observant of their children's routines, questioning the seemingly trivial details that once went unnoticed. The sense of invulnerability that had characterized neighborhood life was forever altered, replaced by a careful, almost instinctual wariness. Conversations that had once been casual now carried undertones of caution, and ordinary events, sleepovers, school activities, community gatherings, were navigated with new layers of scrutiny. Amid this collective consciousness, the victims' memories became the axis around which community healing began to revolve. Families of Tammy Homoka, Leslie Mahaffey, and Kristen French transformed their grief into advocacy, channeling sorrow into efforts to educate, protect, and empower. Foundations, memorials, and awareness programs emerged, providing support to families facing similar threats and fostering dialogue about child safety, consent, and the importance of vigilance. Each public statement, each fundraising event, each lecture or school visit carried both personal catharsis and societal utility, turning the pain of loss into a force for prevention. The legacies of these young girls, once defined tragically by their deaths, began to take on dimensions of resilience, awareness, and caution, their stories becoming enduring lessons woven into the fabric of the community. Psychologically, the impact on the broader society was profound. People grappled with the unsettling truth that evil often lurks beneath the most ordinary surfaces, challenging assumptions about trust, appearances, and intuition. The narrative of the Ken and Barbie killers, so deceptively attractive, seemingly normal, and socially adept, forced a re-evaluation of how danger is perceived and confronted. Teachers, social workers, and law enforcement officers revisited protocols for identifying and preventing abuse, integrating lessons from the Bernardo case into training programs, child safety initiatives, and investigative methodologies. It became clear that prevention required a synthesis of vigilance, education, and nuanced understanding of human behavior, an understanding that extended beyond instinctual fear into structured awareness. The public discourse surrounding Karla Homolka's plea bargain continued to ignite debate, years after her release. For some, the legal compromise represented pragmatism, an acknowledgement that her cooperation was instrumental in securing Bernardo's conviction. For others, it was a moral affront, a painful reminder that justice is not always linear and that societal ethics sometimes clash with legal strategy. This debate permeated media coverage, academic discussions, and even casual conversations, reinforcing the lesson that law is an imperfect tool for resolving the full spectrum of human wrongdoing. Communities grappled with this tension, understanding that while the legal system could mete out punishment, it could not entirely reconcile the emotional and ethical complexities left in the wake of such crimes. Within families of victims, healing became a long, uneven journey. Siblings, parents, and extended family members contended with a mixture of sorrow, anger, and protective instinct. The simple act of walking past a familiar street or hearing a familiar name could trigger waves of memory, bringing the past into sharp relief. Yet over time, families discovered ways to honor the lives lost, creating rituals, memorial spaces, and annual remembrances that preserved memory while fostering resilience. Each act of commemoration was both a tribute and a form of resistance, an assertion that the lives of Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen would not be defined solely by violence, but by the love, laughter, and potential they had embodied. Community organizations also emerged from the shadow of the crimes, focusing on education, awareness, and advocacy. Workshops on adolescent safety, seminars on recognizing manipulative behavior, and programs to empower young people with knowledge and self-confidence became increasingly common. These initiatives extended the impact of the case beyond the immediate victims, touching generations of families who learned to navigate risks, assert boundaries, and trust their instincts. The broader societal consciousness shifted incrementally, absorbing the lessons of the crimes while striving to prevent their recurrence. The case also influenced the criminal justice system, not just in Canada but internationally, becoming a reference point for the evaluation of plea bargains, co-perpetration, and investigative rigor. Legal scholars studied the nuances of Homolka's cooperation and the ethical dimensions of negotiated sentences, debates that continue to inform policy and prosecutorial decision-making. Law enforcement training evolved to integrate psychological profiling, behavioral analysis, and the careful interpretation of circumstantial evidence, ensuring that investigators are better equipped to detect patterns of premeditated violence and complicity. The practical outcomes of the case extended far beyond its immediate victims, reshaping the mechanisms of justice and the methodologies for safeguarding communities. Yet perhaps the most enduring aspect of the aftermath lies in the psychological imprint on society itself. People learned, sometimes painfully, that trust must coexist with discernment, that ordinary facades may conceal extraordinary danger, and that vigilance is not paranoia but responsibility. Parents taught children to speak up, to recognize warning signs, to seek help, and to value personal autonomy. Adolescents learned that boundaries and self-advocacy are essential skills for navigating a complex social world. The lessons of the Bernardo and Homolka crimes became a collective education, embedded in consciousness as cautionary wisdom derived from tragedy. In the quieter, more intimate spaces, the memory of the victims remained a guiding force. Personal recollections, private remembrances, and family narratives ensured that Tammy, Leslie, and Kristen were never reduced to symbols or statistics. Their personalities, aspirations, and joys were preserved alongside the acknowledgement of their tragic deaths. In these spaces, grief and remembrance coexisted, forming the foundation of a slow but steady healing process that emphasized both acknowledgement of pain and the cultivation of resilience. The human dimension remained central, ensuring that the impact of the crimes was felt not only in legal outcomes but in lived experience, ethical reflection,